topic in Unit 4 is slope. The slope of a line is the ratio of the change in y-coordinates to the corresponding change in x-coordinates. And so the way to write that is this triangle, which means change in, it's called delta, change in y over change in x. Slope is also called the rate of change. And that's especially what you're going to see in word problems. They won't necessarily call it slope. They'll ask, what is the rate of change? Which is just another way of saying, what is the slope? All right, so there are 4 different types of slopes, and the nice thing is there's an easy way to remember them. So positive slope, our slope goes up, and the way to remember it is we can draw a P off of it, P for positive. Right? Negative goes down. Again, we can draw an N for negative. Zero slope is a horizontal line, and it looks like a Z. And then undefined is a vertical line, and you can draw a U off of it. So there's 4 different types of slopes. All right, what does Hoy and Bucks mean, and how will they help you understand slope? So if you think back to part 1 last semester, hopefully Hoy and Bucks sound familiar. Hoy is horizontal. That O looks like a 0, so it stands for 0 slope. And then the Y is Y equals. Bucks, vertical line, undefined slope, and X equals. Hoy and Bucks. All right, to find the slope from a graph, we always look at rise over run. Rise over run. So looking at example 1, we'll talk about what that means. In order to figure out rise over run, the first thing we need to do is find 2 points. And we can't just pick any points because not all of the points on this graph are good points to choose to find slope. In order to pick 2 good points, you look for where the line goes through a corner. So here's a point and here's a point. So M, remember, stands for slope. M is rise over run. So that means rise. How much do we go up or down? If we go up, it's a positive number. So 1, 2, 3. Up 3. And then how many do I go over? 1, 2. I run 2. My run is 2. But because I went to the left, it's not just 2, it's negative 2. So 3 over negative 2. And the nice thing about this is we could have done this a different way. We could have gone down 1, 2, 3. But because I'm going down, it's not positive 3, it's negative 3. And then over 2, and because I'm going right, it's a positive 2. So again, I still end up with M equals negative 3 halves. So it's the same thing. Negative 3 over 2 and 3 over negative 2 are the same thing. So just make sure if we have a negative slope that that negative is represented in our fraction, or in our slope. All right, so looking at 2, again, we always look for points where it goes through a corner. So here and here. And maybe you picked 2 different points on your graph, and that's fine. Just make sure they go through a corner. So again, I count rise over run. Up 1, 2. Over 1, 2. Again, I went up and right. Both of those are positive numbers. So M equals 2 over 2. Well, what does that simplify to? 2 over 2 simplifies to 1. Okay. And if you pick 2 different points on this graph, you should have gotten a slope of 1 as well. Number 3 is a horizontal line. So what do we know about the slope of a horizontal line? First of all, what acronym do we use? Hoy. Horizontal 0 slope. M is 0. So that's one of our 0 slopes. If you have questions about how to calculate slope from a graph, please pause your video before you continue on. Otherwise, we're going to talk about how to calculate from 2 points. we use the formula m equals, and that's important to start that way, m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So, looking at our example, we just need to label our x's and y's. Our first value is always x, so we know that's x, and we'll call it x1, and this will be y1, and then x2, y2. So all we're doing is plugging in numbers. So y2 is 3 minus, m equals 3 minus, and then we look at our y1, 5, over, and we look at just our x's. So I have x2, which is negative 4, minus, then I look at x1, which is 2. And now I simplify that. So 3 minus 5 is negative 2, and negative 4 minus 2 is negative 6. Can negative 2 over negative 6 be reduced? Yes, they can both be divided by 2, and we know a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so this would simplify to a positive 1/3. M equals 1/3. Always simplify your fractions if you can. Alright, so looking at example 2, again we have x1, y1, x2, y2. So I always start m equals, what's my y2 value in this case? Negative 6. Minus, now my y1 is what? Negative 1. Well, what happens? Minus a negative becomes a positive. But don't get in the habit of saying this is negative 6 minus 1 just because there's a negative right here. It's minus a negative, which turns it to a positive. All right, and then over, I have 5 minus 5. So negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5. 5 minus 5 is 0. So I want you to plug in your calculator, negative 5 divided by 0, and see what you get. You should get an error message, which means that this slope is undefined. And there's an easy trick to remember that. We can write OK, which means 0 can be divided by a number, but the word no, we can't divide by 0, be undefined. If you have questions about solving from 2 points, again, please pause your video and ask questions before you move on. Otherwise, you're going to look at how to identify slope from an equation. So it says identify m from the slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, super important formula for this unit. So y equals mx plus b is slope-intercept form, but in order to figure out slope, this line right here is super important. You must solve for y first. It has to say y equals, otherwise you can't just say it's the number in front of x. So looking at example 1, is y solved for? Yes, so we can go ahead and figure out slope. Slope is always the number in front of x. So in this case, m equals negative 3. In number 2, is y solved for? Yes, y is by itself, which means we can figure out the slope. What the heck? There's no number in front of x. So what number can we use to represent this space right here? What number can we use as a placeholder? 1. So m equals 1 in this case. Now looking at example 3, again, look back at this sentence right here. You must solve for y first. Is y by itself in number 3? No, so we have to solve for y. In order to do that, what's the first thing we need to move? We need to move this 2x to the other side, so we're going to add 2x to both sides, which cancels this out and leaves me with 4y equals 2x plus 8. Notice how I put that x term first. When we're talking about slope-intercept form, it should be y equals mx plus b. So your x term should come before your constant, before your number. All right, but y still isn't by itself, so what's the last thing I need to do? Divide by 4 on both sides, which cancels these out, and leaves me with y equals, now I have to simplify. I can't just leave it 2x plus 8 all over 4. I have to take each term and divide it by 4. So 2 divided by 4 is 1/2, and the x stays with it, and 8 divided by 4 is 2. Now I'd ask myself, is y solved for? Yes. So what's the number in front of x? M equals 1/2. Looking at example 4 is y solved for. And there are fractions in this problem. So in order to get rid of that fraction, what do? It's a negative number. So I'm not going to multiply by the reciprocal here because I'm moving that whole term. I add 1/2 x to both sides, which leaves me with y equals, again, we put that x term first, 1/2 x minus 7. So again, in this problem now, is y solved for? Yes. What's the number in front of x? Again, it's 1/2 in this problem. If you have questions before moving on, please pause your video and get them answered before you move on to the next page. Otherwise, we will keep going. So the next part says, given the slope of a line, you can also find missing coordinates. Find r if m equals -3/2 and the line goes through r6, 10, -3. Well, first of all, what do we know about m? How do we find the slope of something? M equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Change in y over change in x. So in this problem, we are given an m, and we're given 2 points, so we can figure out what r equals. I'm just plugging in the values that they gave me into this equation right here. So first of all, they tell me m is -3/2, so that's where I'm going to start. Then I'm going to label these points and plug them into my equation. So y2 is -3 minus, always minus, y1 is 6 over x2 is 10 minus r. And that's fine, that's what it should say. But now we need to look at this problem and ask ourselves, what can we simplify? Right here, we know that -3 minus 6 can be simplified. So again, I'm going to rewrite my slope. -3/2 equals -3 minus 6 is -9, and 10 minus r stays on the bottom. Now, how do you think we solve this problem? What does it look like that we've learned in the past? It's set up to be like a proportion. So we multiply this, we multiply across. So 2 times -9 is -18. Now, it's important to remember that negative only goes with one number. So if the 3 is negative, that's where it stays. You can't make the 3 and the 2 negative. So in this case, the 3 is negative, so I have -3 times 10 minus r. The next thing I do is distribute. So -30, -3 times a negative r. Negative times a negative is a positive 3r. Okay, now I need to get r by itself, so I add 30 to both sides. -18 plus 30 is 12. And the last step is to divide by 3. So r equals 4. R equals 4 in that case. Again, I just want to bring your attention back up here. The fraction for our slope was negative 3 over 2. So I kept the negative with the 3 and distributed it. I didn't make the 2 negative as well. This negative 18 is negative because there's a negative 9 here. So please just be careful about that. All right, we're going to do one more, and then we need to fill out your formula sheet. So again, let's just write the formula here. M equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. They tell me my slope is 1/5, so that's what I'm going to plug in. 1/5 equals, then I label these x1, y1, x2, y2. y2 is 5 minus y1 is 4 over x2 is r minus x1 is negative 2. So we have two things we can simplify here. Minus a negative becomes a positive. And then again, we can simplify this numerator. So I'm going to rewrite this. 1/5 equals 5 minus 4 is 1 over r plus 2. Again, we have a proportion here, so I multiply across. 1 times r plus 2 is just r plus 2. And 1 times 5 is 5. So here we have a one-step equation. How do I solve for r? Subtract 2 from both sides. R equals 3. If you have questions about this section, please raise your hand before you move on. Before we get to your you-dos, we also need to fill in our formula sheet. So we have a couple to add to our formula sheet today. The first one is HOI-BUCS. HOI stands for horizontal, 0, slope, y equals, and then we have BUCS, vertical line, undefined slope, and x equals. So HOI and BUCS. We also had a few more things pertaining to slope. So we have rise over run. And then the other formula we learned was to figure out slope. The formula for slope is m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now remember, on your formula quiz, you're going to be expected to label these things. So on your formula quiz, if you do not write the word slope and you just write that formula, it's not going to count as a point because we don't know that you know that's the formula for slope. Knowing that formula is great, but you also have to know what it's used for. If you don't have any questions, you can go ahead and go back to your you-dos and get started on those. When you finish, please raise your hand so one of us can check you.